So I've heard from a bunch of different people that GCSE Geography is one of the hardest exams to try and get your technique down for. There are 9 markers, entire case studies, even cartographical skills. If you can imagine it, it's probably in a geography paper. I personally didn't do geography, but this is my friend James, who also got straight 9s and he did do geography. And I reckon he has some tips that he can share with you. Alright James, so what do you think was the biggest problem that you faced when you were doing geography revision?
The biggest challenge I faced was definitely making sure that I had covered everything. The problem with GCSE Geography is that you could be an expert in geography and still lose marks because you don't know exactly what AQA is going to ask you. Therefore, my best friend in my geography revision was AQA specification. I read that document multiple times, admittedly too late, but every single point that's mentioned in the specification could be assessed.
So I remember last year seeing on Reddit a bunch of different posts crashing out about a specific question, saying something like, shade the country of your given case study, and almost no one got it. If random things like that can be asked, how can you go about trying to get those cheeky 1 markers that you seemingly have no way to revise for?
That's exactly why reading the specification in depth is so important. We got that question in our AQA paper too.
Oh, it's your paper?
Yes, it was. And I had only looked up the location of my case study country the night before my exam, so I got really lucky. So don't make the mistake that I made. Read your specification early on so you know exactly what it is that you need to know. And if you don't know, look it up.
So I've heard from a bunch of different people that apparently you need to memorize a ton of different statistics. I've heard people full on ranting about the amount of stuff you need to memorize. And I'm curious, did you find an efficient way to revise statistics?
There are 2 key methods of revising statistics. The first is flashcards, the same way you'd memorize vocabulary for a language, for example. Put all of the statistics on a flashcard set, for example Quizlet or Anki, and go through them whenever you have time, such as on your bus or at your bus stop or on a train. But almost all candidates know their statistics, so what's going to set you apart is memorizing chains of reasoning. You need to be able to start at a statistic and bring yourself through to a conclusion. You need to explain what the statistic means in terms of the question that you're answering and bring in limitations and disadvantages.
So it's all well and good knowing how to do the short answer questions, but I know GCSE Geography also has long answer questions like 6 markers and 9 markers. Do you have any tips on how you can approach them and get those marks?
Like I've mentioned before earlier, you could be an expert at geography and still only get 7 or 8 marks in a 9 marker, for example, if you don't know what structure AQA are looking for. What I'd recommend is 2 mini paragraphs for 6 markers and 2 large paragraphs for 9 markers, apart from your conclusion if necessary. The way you split up those 2 paragraphs varies from question to question. You could do short-term then long-term, for example, or socio-economic then environmental, for example. But the most important thing is to never do advantages in 1 paragraph and disadvantages in another paragraph. What you need to do is have advantages and disadvantages in the same sentence and link them with connectives like however or although. That's what's going to get your AO3 marks. That's what's going to bring you towards your conclusion, which is something that so many students lack when answering 6 and 9 markers. Their responses become too descriptive and not analytic enough.
So say you've got yourself to kind of a 6 or 7 out of 9 position on those 9 markers. What kind of additional tip could you give to help you tip over into those 8 and 9 mark answers?
To get the most out of your 6 and 9 mark answers, the things that most people aren't doing actually happen before you start writing at all. As soon as you read your question, you should be looking for key things to highlight. The most important word in the question is the first word, whether it's describe, explain, or assess, or first 3 words to what extent. Your command word completely dictates what you have to do in that answer. If your question is only asking you to describe the theory of something, then bringing in case studies is not going to get you any marks. Also, it's important to see if the question is asking you to use a figure or to use a case study or your own understanding, because once again, if there's a figure and you don't use it, you could be capped at 4 or 6 marks no matter how good of an answer you give.
So last August on results day, when we were all obviously discussing our results, I saw a bunch of people were cooking paper 1 and paper 2, but then on paper 3, somehow they managed to have a generational fumble. I saw that you actually did pretty well on your paper 3 if I recall, so what kind of tips do you have for paper 3 specifically?
One of the key issues with paper 3 is that there are no past paper questions for your pre-release. Your teacher may have given you some example questions for what could come up, but what I would recommend is trying to predict them yourself. So, even though past papers aren't about your specific pre-release, do look at some of them and see how many maths questions there are, what the 6 markers are like, what the 9 markers are like. You should notice that almost every single pre-release 9 marker is, do you think this development should go ahead? Technically, AQA can surprise you. In our paper, we got something slightly different. To what extent do you think this development will be sustainable? But the answer is pretty much the same anyway. If you can predict what might come up in your papers, then that sets you at a huge advantage, because you're not going in completely blind.
So yeah, those are some really useful tips for the pre-release, but there's a whole other section of paper 3, the fieldwork. What would you recommend for revising for the fieldwork part of the paper?
I know this may seem obvious, but don't forget to memorize your titles. I know you don't get any marks for writing them down, but if your examiner is marking your answers and doesn't know what you did, then you're at a loss. Also, if you don't really remember what that trip was like or what you were doing, then ask one of your friends or teachers to explain to you what you did. If you think about it, the fieldwork trip was personal to you. You don't have to use accurate data. You can just make up data that's in the right area and your examiner will never know technically. So, the best way to make sure that your answers for the fieldwork section are perfect is, unfortunately, by memorizing them. I'd recommend getting them into some sort of flashcard set or maybe a poster in your room, and you really need to know the fieldwork questions off by heart. Luckily, there aren't that many things they can ask you. It's pretty much either risk assessment, data presentation, evaluation, so you should be ready for anything that they throw at you. AQA are running out of questions to ask, so they're just going to repeat the same questions over and over again.
So James, I've been hearing that geography is a really time-pressured exam, right? What would you recommend to try and deal with that time pressure?
Every single second in a geography paper is valuable. One thing that I would recommend doing is not doing the questions in order, because for example the 6 and 9 markers come one after the other. So what I did in my papers to reduce both how much my hand was hurting and how much time I was using was first doing a 6 marker or a 9 marker and then doing the 1 and 2 markers, not doing the questions in order. Because if you do decide to do them in order, then your hand will hurt so much after 6 and 9 markers and you'll be taking too much time resting and recovering from that instead of continuing to cook with the paper. If you are feeling particularly time pressured, there are a few things you can do to maximize the marks you can gain. For example, if you don't have time to do a 6 or 9 marker properly, then write something, because that can be worth 1 or 2 marks, and especially with the 9 markers with 3 spag marks, if you write anything, it doesn't even have to be related to geography per se. You can get those 3 spag marks just by writing a couple of sentences of correct grammar.
So James, you've given me some really good advice in general, but what would you say the most avoidable mistake people make in GCSE geography is?
There are 2 key really avoidable mistakes. One is choosing the wrong section. Choose the section that your teacher has taught you. Too many people don't do it. If you've done water, then don't do food or energy. The second thing is missing those 1 markers, which are like complete this bar graph or complete this line chart, because they don't have any answer lines for you. So it's so easy to not see them and lose those few marks. That could be the difference between a 7 and an 8 or an 8 or a 9.
So I know for me, about 2 weeks before the exam, like roughly now, I was feeling under a complete mountain of stress, and I imagine for geography specifically, which is such a content-heavy subject, that would be even more so. Would you say by the time the exams draw closer, that stress kind of goes away?
The good thing about geography is that some questions are repeated year after year. So as long as you've done enough practice, then you should find that some of the questions seem familiar and standard, so it doesn't feel like a new territory that you're walking into.
I know it might seem like there is a ton of work to do now, but trust me, if you just lock in now and do the work, by the time your exams roll around for every subject, including geography, you're gonna feel ready, and you're going to be ready. But if you do need some extra help for maths, economics, or computer science, I am offering a free 30-minute trial tuition session at the email on the screen right now. Thank you for watching, consider subscribing, and good luck. It's time to lock in.